From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Saks Off Fifth. Up to 70% off every day. Spring is in full swing here at Saks Off Fifth, with so many exciting trends to try. From matching sets and floral dresses to wide-leg jeans and chic accessories, find all of the season's must-have styles. Plus, shop new designer arrivals weekly. Find Gucci, Valentino Garavani, Versace, Stuart Weitzman, and more. Head to SaksOffFifth.com or a Saks Off Fifth store near you for up to 70% off every day.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Citizen Detective, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1989. On the evening of Sunday, October 1st, Michael T. decided to stop by the apartment of a new friend, a young woman he knew only as Krista. Well after midnight on what was now October 2nd, he drove to Krista's neighborhood and parked in the driveway of the house next to hers. In the dark, he walked around to the back of the house where Krista's apartment was. She occupied the small rear ground floor unit. He walked up and opened the screen door, and was about to knock on her entrance door when he saw that it was slightly ajar. That was odd. Krista didn't usually leave her door standing open. Mike pushed the door open wider and looked directly into the apartment. It was pitch black inside, but after fumbling for some light, Mike saw that Krista lay on the couch. But she hadn't fallen asleep. She was pale, her eyes wide open. She was dead. Mike knew Krista did not have a phone in her apartment. He walked briskly to his truck and drove quickly to the nearby Fast Break convenience store, where he used a payphone on the corner to call Wichita police. When he made contact with 911, he reported that he had found his friend Krista dead of a possible overdose. Firefighters from Fire Station 4 were dispatched upon the report of a deceased person. Wichita Police Department Officer D.K. Alexander also responded, and he and the firefighters arrived at the convenience store at 1:09 a.m. There, they met the 911 caller, Mike T., who told them his friend was dead of what looked like an overdose. They followed his pickup truck to 506 South Osage, Apartment 2, located in the rear of the house. At 1:10 a.m., Officer Alexander and firefighters Knockin and Carr approached the door. As Mike had found, the storm door was closed, but the interior door was open. Officer Alexander and the other first responders went to the young woman lying on the sofa. It was immediately apparent from her pallor and stiffness that she was dead. No pulse was detected, and she was in rigor. More EMTs arrived, and at 1:13 a.m., EMT C. Maxwell pronounced the young woman deceased. She'd been dead for several hours, it looked like. There was nothing they could do for her, although it was not immediately apparent what had killed her. EMS personnel withdrew, being careful not to disturb the scene further. Officers Zandler and Davenport responded to the scene, a 2-story white house divided into 3 apartments, arriving at 1:18 a.m. Officer Alexander radioed that a supervising lieutenant was needed. He then preserved the scene until the death investigators arrived, stationing Officer Zandler at the door to keep everyone out. Lieutenant D.D. Meyer was at a nearby hospital on another call when he heard the radio chatter about a dead body at an apartment on South Osage. He informed dispatch that he would head to the location, arriving at 1:29 a.m. When he walked up to the rear unit, Officer Davenport was standing with the 911 caller, Mike T. Officer Alexander had already learned from Mike that he was a friend of the young woman in the apartment, who he said was Krista, but he wasn't a close enough friend that he knew her last name. Officer Alexander had asked Officer Davenport to hold Mike there so he could be questioned. This appeared to make Mike very nervous. He asked whether he was under arrest, why he was being guarded. He wanted to know what had happened to Krista. Officer Alexander told him they didn't know, but they needed to find out. He said Mike wasn't under arrest, but asked Mike to please go with Officer Davenport down to the station to be interviewed by detectives. The two left in Officer Davenport's cruiser. Of course, the guy who had called in finding the body was someone of significant interest to the investigating officers, and Mike was acting nervous and skittish, yet remarkably unemotional about the death of someone he called a friend. Lieutenant Meyer and arriving detectives Tenbrook and Schroeder observed the scene and gathered from papers in the apartment that the woman on the couch was likely named Krista Martin. This was later confirmed in an official identification by the medical examiner. Detective C.A. Wiemeyer, a CSI, was called to the scene by dispatch at 1:22 a.m. When he arrived, Officer Alexander was waiting for him out front of the residence. They walked back toward Krista's ground-floor apartment on the east end of the apartment house. On the back porch by the rear door was Officer Zandler, stationed there to log everyone who went in and out of the apartment. Lieutenant Meyer and Detective Schroeder were the only two members of law enforcement in the apartment when Detective Wiemeyer arrived. From the back door of the building, which was the only entryway into the rear apartment, CSI Detective Wiemeyer could see the body of Krista Martin. She lay on her back on a couch positioned on the south wall of the living room. Her tongue was protruding from her mouth. Detective Wiemeyer's notes state that her head was on a couch pillow, tilted slightly toward the right. Her right arm was down at her side, and her left arm lay draped across her hip. Her sock-covered feet hung off the end of the couch. Besides the socks, she was partially clothed, wearing a tan and gray, long-sleeved striped top, red underwear, and pegged jeans that were still on her left ankle. But for both lower half clothing items, the underwear and the jeans, the right leg was off and hanging off the end of the couch. A dried-out bloody tampon sat on the floor. Krista's lower body was mostly covered by a maroon comforter-looking thing that turned out to be a sleeping bag. A pair of gray women's boots sat on the floor near the couch. Extensive bruising was visible on the left side of Krista's neck and the left side of her face. She also had a bruise above her right eye. Lividity had settled in her lower buttocks, visible from the side as her hips were not fully covered by the sleeping bag. Brownish-red foam was in her mouth. There is no mention in the report of any blood other than the tampon. The only light on in the apartment was a very dim overhead light in the living room, but the TV was on, silently tuned to a music video channel. Both of these light sources would turn out to have been turned on by Mike T. as he tried to make out what the scene was in the apartment. The room appeared mostly undisturbed, but there was one sign that something confrontational had gone down. From Detective Wiemeyer's report, quote, "On the floor between the table and the couch, I noticed a plate that was tipped over. There was a steak on the floor, S-T-E-A-K, along with a steak knife and a fork. Also, towards the northeast portion of the couch was a corn cob on the floor," end quote. Based on the single plate and silverware for one, investigators inferred that only one person had been eating a meal. The steak had steak or barbecue sauce on it, and a stain of the same color appeared on Krista's shirt. Several of the observers, like Mike, at first thought it was blood on Krista's shirt, but it did indeed prove to be barbecue sauce. It was hard to tell what happened here. With the lights off and the food in the midst of being eaten but spilled onto the floor, it appeared that Krista had been attacked during the daytime. Later inventory of the body would show that Krista was dressed in jeans, socks, a shirt, and bra, not something most women would wear to bed. Although an official determination of homicide had yet to be returned by the medical examiner, investigators at the scene were certain that, at the very least, Krista had been sexually assaulted. Consequently, they treated the apartment like a crime scene. Lots of items from the round living room coffee table were documented and collected into evidence. In an ashtray were a small set of tongs and a marijuana roach, along with several cigarette butts. A jotted note on the table with some handwriting on it and people's names was collected. Also on the cluttered coffee table were a 7-Up bottle, a Pepsi can, a Mountain Dew can, a glass of some kind of soda, a pack of Marlboro Lights, a book of matches, a pair of sunglasses, an empty film canister, a purple lighter, a tub of Blistex, and a bottle of incense. Also scattered around the table were some photos of what appeared to be family members, some darts, a brown box with some papers, a social security card in Krista's name. On the floor next to the coffee table was an upside-down blue Frisbee with a marijuana pipe in it. There was other furniture in the living room as well, a plush chair with some empty cardboard boxes on it, on which was perched an oscillating fan, and a wooden chair with some jackets and a pair of camouflage pants on it. A pair of sneakers sat by the exterior door. The walls of the living room were decorated with magazine pages of women in bathing suits and sports cars. Lieutenant Meyer noted that the small bedroom at the rear of the apartment was extremely cluttered. There was no bed in the room. Instead, there was a lounge chair and a wooden chair on the north wall that had clothes strewn all over them. Against the east wall was a bicycle and a couple of fans. On the north wall was a brown chest of drawers, atop of which sat a jewelry box, and the surface of which was cluttered with several other items. The bottom drawer hung open, but had spider webs in it, indicating it hadn't really been used recently. A broom leaned up against the wall, and a trash can sat on the floor. The closet door hung open. In the kitchen, there was a frying pan on top of the stove and a bottle of Heinz barbecue sauce next to it, with sauce residue in the pan. There was a package of ears of corn and a couple of empty cobs that had been eaten. Brown butcher paper from some kind of meat sat on the kitchen table. An aquarium contained a snake and a slug, which is just totally disgusting. A cat's litter box was in the corner, and Officer Alexander reported that when he arrived, a cat ran outside. A yearbook sat open on the kitchen table, and on top of it was a blue backpack. The yearbook was open to page 161. Next to the refrigerator was a paper bag containing several beer cans. In the bathroom was a pair of sneakers. The toilet lid was open and, quote, it appeared as though the stool had been used, end quote. I'm not sure if that means there was urine in the toilet or something else. A box of Tampax sat next to the toilet. Detective Wiemeyer considered points of entry. He noted that the door he had come in was the only means of entry to the apartment. It was technically the back door to the larger house, but it was the front door as far as this apartment was concerned. The storm door to the outside didn't lock, but the interior door had a deadbolt, which was unlocked. There was no evidence of tampering on the strike plate or door jamb. All the window screens were intact except for one window that had an air conditioning unit in it, and the shades were drawn on all but one window in the bedroom. The detective noted that someone peering in the window from the outside would have been able to see the couch and possibly Krista lying on it. But the windows were all closed, and none appeared to have been messed with, as the notes say. Detective Wiemeyer took photos of the scene and the body in place. Then Dr. DeJong of the Sedgwick County Coroner's Office checked the body, noting that rigor mortis was strong. He estimated that Krista had been dead for about 12 hours. It was currently 3 a.m. He took a rectal temperature and collected vaginal swabs on the spot. Detective Wiemeyer then photographed some more and measured and sketched the entire scene. At around 5:50 a.m., Sam Epsey from Wichita Mortuary Service removed the body for autopsy. Detective Wiemeyer collected the maroon sleeping bag and used tampon into evidence. He also collected all the items in the living room around the body, but oddly did not collect the steak knife and fork on the floor. He collected the pillowcase and cushions that Krista was lying on and the camouflage pants from the chair, which looked as though they might belong to a male. Miscellaneous papers and letters were collected as physical evidence, as well as a military ID tag in the name of a Donald T. Several items from the kitchen were collected: the yearbook, the backpack, a spiral notebook from the bedroom, which contained miscellaneous papers, notes, letters, and phone numbers. He also collected the sneakers from the bathroom and a sample of contents from the toilet. Captain Stokes had canvassed the outside of the apartment and collected a balled-up piece of duct tape and a box of used Tampax from a silver corrugated trash bin sitting on the ground outside Krista's stoop. Finally, a set of keys was located inside one of the jacket pockets and collected. It would later be noted that the key to the door was missing from this set of keys. Captain Stokes also requested the collection of some pieces of what appeared to be a broken green ceramic bowl sitting on the sidewalk near the back porch. It was still unclear what had happened to Krista, but the bruising on her face and the broken pieces of a heavy bowl might be related.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
Detective Hennessy, for whom this was his first homicide case, arrived on the scene and checked it out for himself around 2:10 a.m. Lieutenant Drew and Detective Voigt also arrived and assisted with processing the scene. ADA Janice Fitch arrived and informed the investigators that Krista Martin was the sole occupant on the apartment lease. Despite the camo pants and the photos of hot girls and cars on the walls, no man lived there. The CSI team dusted some areas and items for prints and collected several of them. After Krista's body was removed, the detectives realized that the couch she was lying on was a hide-a-bed. They unfolded the bed and checked underneath it and noted a white Marlboro cigarette which was consistent with some of the butts in the ashtray. Somewhat unbelievably, they didn't collect this cigarette. They also didn't collect a Dr. Pepper can behind the couch. Detective Max Tenbrook noted that the neighbors to the south of Krista's home at 514 South Osage, Chapman and Belinda Mertes, were sitting on their porch on the front of their home. It was the driveway of this house where Mike T. had parked his pickup truck, which was still sitting there, since Mike had been driven to the station in a patrol car. Mr. Mertes told Detective Tenbrook that the truck was not there at 12:15 a.m. when he looked out the window. The couple knew Krista by name and said that she often had all sorts of people coming and going at all hours. Krista had no car and used her bike for transportation, they said. The Merteses had heard something worth reporting. On the previous Monday, around 4 a.m., two men had been fighting loudly with Krista outside her house. Krista had been yelling, "Someone call the police." A few minutes later, they could hear one man say to the other, "Why did you have to hit her?" And the other said, "She's a woman, so she deserves it." Mr. Mertes did call the police and then went outside to see what was going on. All he saw was a white male getting into a car that quickly drove off. The car was possibly an older model AMC, but he couldn't really tell in the dark. The couple called the police back and told them the disturbance was over and not to bother coming. Now, when Krista was found dead, the neighbors, Chapman and Belinda Mertes, said they slept with their window open right next to Krista's place, and they could usually hear everything. but they heard nothing in the past day or so. Definitely no sounds that sounded like someone being killed. They also said they recognized Mike T. He had been over there before. Another neighbor, Mrs. Carol Newby, also heard the skirmish on Monday night. She heard 2 male voices and a woman's voice, very loud, coming from the direction of Krista's home. She didn't know who lived there, just that it was some kind of fight around 4 a.m. that sounded rough. Another neighbor, Beverly Orth, told a local reporter that she heard yelling at 4 a.m. and looked out her window and saw 2 men outside the rear apartment at 506 South Osage. This physical confrontation with the verified, albeit canceled, police call was of interest to the investigators. In fact, it made the papers, which blared headlines that the young murder victim, spoiler, Krista was murdered, had been attacked by unidentified men the previous week. Who were these guys? Did they come back to finish the job? After everyone was done processing the scene, the apartment was locked up around 8 a.m. Wichita police initially classified the case as sudden death, body found, until the results of the autopsy came in. The autopsy on Krista took place on October 2nd. It was attended by DA investigator Mona First, Lieutenant Drew, Detective Catchus, a CSI, Detective Landwehr, and Detective Hennessy. Krista's clothing, shirt, white bra, jeans, red underwear, and socks, was removed from her body and packed for evidence. Also collected was all Krista's jewelry, an earring from her right ear, 2 gold necklaces, a ring from her left-hand ring finger, and a silver bracelet on her right arm. A fake ID in the name of Julie Krause, indicating that Krista, who was the one in the photo, was 24 years old, was in her jeans pocket. A matchbook with the name Toby and a phone number on it was also collected. Dr. David DeJong was the pathologist conducting the procedure. It started at 9:40 and lasted until 2:20 p.m. Scratches were observed on Krista's throat. They were noted as 8 even striations, 3 inches long, starting from a darker mark lower on her neck. They were mostly superficial and hadn't bled much. It was unclear what had made those markings. Bruises were noted on Krista's arms and legs, and what appeared to be a bite mark on her inside right leg near her knee. This was removed in its entirety for further examination, as was the entire scratched area on the skin of her throat. Krista's stomach contents were examined, and it was determined that she had eaten very recently, so recently that the limited food was undigested. It appeared that green peppers were involved. Remember that a steak was sitting on the floor with an upset plate and silverware, as though Krista was eating when someone interrupted her. A rape kit was done and fingernail scrapings were taken from all 10 nails. You'll recall that Dr. DeJong had also taken some vaginal swabs of Krista as she lay on the couch in her apartment. Dr. DeJong handed 2 fresh swabs over to Detective Nelson, who placed them in plastic tubes and later transported the swabs to the lab and turned them into his evidence lab tech Mary Ayers for processing. At the end of the procedure, Dr. DeJong concluded that the cause of Krista's death was a head injury causing hemorrhage to the base of the brain. It appeared she'd been struck on the left side of the head by an indeterminate object, and the area there was swollen. This blow caused her brain to bounce in her skull, causing the brain to swell and bleed, which was fatal. Observing the autopsy, Lieutenant Drew formed a theory. He dispatched Detectives Nelson and Landwehr to Krista's apartment to collect the serrated steak knife the CSI had failed to collect on the first go-round. This from Detective Hennessy's notes, quote, "By comparing the points of the blade to the scratches on her throat, it appeared that it matched up perfectly. The knife was submitted to be tested for blood residue, as it appears to be some kind of blood on the blade, the origin not determined." Someone had taken the steak knife Krista was using to cut her steak and held it to her throat, scratching her with the serrated blade. These marks, plus the lack of defensive wounds on Krista's body, painted a picture of a terrified young woman held at knife point by someone who then raped and fatally bludgeoned her. Let's pause here to remember who Krista was. Krista Roxanne Martin was born to parents Charles and Earlene Martin on March 20th, 1969. Sister Sherry Martin was just 1 year younger, and the two were close. Charles and Earlene divorced, and Charles remarried Susan. Earlene was remarried to Tony Ferran, whose sons Angel and Timothy were Krista's stepbrothers. Krista grew up in Hayesville, Kansas, where she attended and graduated from Campus High School. She was universally described as very outgoing and friendly. She was a tomboy and ran on the track team. Although Krista seemed to fit right in, her friend Mary Ann, who lived next door to her growing up, has said that they both felt like outsiders. This may have been because Krista was struggling with defining her sexual orientation. Eventually, in high school, she had her first lesbian relationship. After that, she was referred to as bisexual, but it seems most of the emotionally impactful relationships in her short life were with female partners. Krista had had a longer-term relationship with a woman whom I'm calling Sasha, not her real name. Sasha was in her mid-20s, and Krista was definitely in love with her, even though the two had broken up and Sasha had moved on to someone else. Sasha and Krista moved in the same social circles and spent a lot of time at local bars with other lesbian young women. Krista had had some problems with some of them, as the investigators would learn. Krista had also had some problems with underage drinking that resulted in her being on probation starting in September 1988. As part of her sentence, she was required to complete outpatient alcohol treatment. This simply required her to attend women-only group sessions of the Women's Alcohol Treatment Services Center. Krista's counselor said she was making progress with the treatment, but it's clear that she continued to drink on occasion. Krista had been bouncing around a bit in terms of where she was living. She'd previously lived with two other women, one of whom she had a romantic past with, and then she couch surfed. She'd moved into the apartment where she was killed just a month earlier, along with her Siamese house cat named Joey and apparently her pet snake. She enjoyed living alone and being independent, but unfortunately, 2 weeks before she was killed, she was laid off from her job at Kansas Blueprint due to cutbacks. Now she was unemployed, running out of money, unable to pay her rent, and facing eviction. Detective Lee was assigned to go to Krista's dad Charles's house and notify him of his daughter's passing. This was done at 5:58 a.m. on Monday morning. Charles said he'd last seen Krista when he went to her apartment on Saturday morning. They got into a heated argument. Krista apparently told friends that her dad lectured her about being irresponsible and preached to her about her lifestyle, specifically about Sasha, and also her being evicted for inability to pay the rent. It's not clear what exactly Charles disapproved of, but there was clearly some aspect of Krista's life that he felt the need to disagree with her choices. Krista was very upset about this fight with her dad. Detective Lee asked about Krista's friends and relationships. Charles told Detective Lee that Krista had known Sasha for 3 years, and they'd previously lived together with another woman named Darlene. Charles depicted Sasha and Krista's relationship as very fraught and physically confrontational. Basically, he said the two women often got into fistfights. Of course, this was of interest to detectives who did not yet know the results of the rape kit. Since Krista was bludgeoned, it wasn't out of the question that a woman had done it. The blow to the head implied rage that might be personal. Also, Krista was covered up with a sleeping bag to hide her nude lower half. Detectives read into that her killer had an emotional attachment to her and felt remorse. And they recalled that there was no forced entry to the apartment. Krista had possibly let someone she trusted inside while she ate her steak and corn at the coffee table. Charles gave the investigators a long list of Krista's friends and associates, and the detectives started the exhaustive task of tracking down and interviewing them all. Further interviews with Krista's family, her parents and sister, indicated that 3 items were missing from the apartment. 1, a gold necklace with a cross on it that Krista always wore, which was nowhere to be found. 2, her house key. And 3, Krista's second bike, a blue one, which was always locked outside the garage when she was home. Detectives made a note that whoever killed Krista might have been given Krista's key and, after killing her, stolen her necklace as a trophy and fled the scene on the blue bike. Police started to finesse the timeline for when Krista had been killed, recalled the pathologist's expert opinion that Krista had been dead for about 12 hours when he examined her at 3 a.m. In the apartment, detectives found a grocery receipt from the Seneca Market on South Seneca, dated Sunday, October 1st. It did not have a timestamp on it, but grocery items on her handwritten shopping list in Krista's apartment matched up with the items on the receipt, and countertop food and packaging in the kitchen, which I've already discussed, also indicated that she had indeed gone to the market on Sunday. The reports on this are very vague, but apparently the investigators were able to confirm that Krista had been to the Seneca Market on Sunday afternoon in the 2 to 3 p.m. timeframe. The theory was that she then went home to fix herself a steak and corn, which she'd bought that day in the market. The steak pan and barbecue sauce were still out, and the steak plate, meat, and single set of silverware were on the floor. No one had seen or heard from Krista after her market outing, and she'd been in rigor when she was found, so the window during which her death occurred was roughly between 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon and when Mike T. found her around 1 a.m. on Monday morning. Police did all the usual things, canvassing the neighbors who told the stories we've heard. In general, Krista didn't associate with her neighbors other than in passing, and never mentioned any problems with anybody in the neighborhood. The police did look into a 17-year-old named Ray, who was reported by a neighbor, Ginger R., during the neighborhood canvass. Ginger lived at 532 South Osage, but said her sister lived in the unit above Krista. This kid, Ray, had thrown a beer bottle through her window 2 months earlier, and he'd made several sexual advances toward her. She had filed a police report about the window incident, but suggested Ray's name to Detective Hennessy as someone who might have anger issues toward women. I'm not sure how Ray was ruled out, but police quickly moved on from him. They also looked into Krista's workplace, but they quickly learned that she didn't have any problems with anyone at work, and there were no hard feelings about her being laid off.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary, flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
Detectives started making the rounds of Krista's friends, of which there were many. They learned that, like any 20-year-old, she liked to party and frequented bars and clubs, the library, bosom buddies, Totos, and baby dolls. They started to try to piece together the last hours of Krista's life, where she'd been, and with whom. On Saturday, Krista spent some time with her friend Kathy S., a school janitor. Kathy and her partner Dale were a married couple who hung out with Krista a lot. Kathy picked Krista up on Saturday afternoon so she could do her laundry at their place. Krista told her all about the fight she'd had with her dad that morning. She was pretty upset about it. Then the two of them drove over to Krista's mom's house because Kathy wanted to borrow her 8mm projector. This was confirmed to be the last time anyone in Krista's family saw or heard from her. Then Kathy dropped Krista off at home because Krista wanted to get ready for a going-away party she was attending that night at her friend Angela S.'s house. Angela and her boyfriend Toby were new friends of Krista's, and Angela was about to move to Salina. Angela picked Krista up and they went to the party at Angela's sometime before 6:30. Toby, who worked with Angela at KFC, arrived soon after that. Around 9:30, the group headed to Bosom Buddy's bar. There they met up with a bunch of friends, including Toby's friend Jan, Z, and some other people. Krista also ran into Annie, who was a very recent former girlfriend of her ex Sasha, and another couple she knew named Sean and Dennis. Around 11:30, Krista, Jan, Sean, Dennis, and Toby all left Bosom Buddy's bar together and went to Toto's, another favorite spot. There, Krista ran into some people she knew well, Sasha and her ex-wife Darlene, and Sasha's new love interest, Robin. Sasha soon got very drunk and passed out at the bar. Sometime around 2 a.m., Krista asked Jan Z if they could please drive Sasha home, and Jan said okay. She didn't know Sasha, and she had just met Krista, and she was genuinely just helping these young women out who needed a ride. Now, it's important to note that although Sasha was a lesbian and had been legally married to Darlene, they were separated, and Sasha was now living with a guy named Paul. Paul and Sasha had met in AA, and it's possible that Paul was her sponsor. Sasha knew that Paul was going to be mad at her when she came home drunk. Some reports say that Paul was obsessed with Sasha, hated her female friends, didn't approve of same-sex relationships, and may have even been violent with Sasha. Once Jan and Krista got a very drunk Sasha into the car, she kept mumbling about her old man beating her constantly and how she was scared to show up so late after being out partying. The group stopped at the Quick Trip to get Sasha some Marlboros and then drove to the address she gave. Krista and Jan had to carry Sasha to the front door, and sure enough, the dude who opened it was apoplectic, shouting and enraged at Sasha and the other two women. This was Paul K., and he was pissed. Krista ran back to the car and got Sasha's left-behind purse and ran it to the front door. Paul grabbed it and slammed the door in her face. Then Jan drove Krista home. She later told police that Krista got out of the car and walked around back of the residence. Jan didn't see her go inside. The door was not visible from the roadway. Jan drove off and was home by 3 a.m. when a movie she wanted to watch was starting. So now the police knew that Krista had been dropped off at home around 2:45 a.m. on Saturday, October 1st. The next day, we don't know what she did all morning. Then she went to the market, came home and cooked, and after that, interacted with someone who turned violent. The question was, who was this person? Was it a man or a woman? And why did he or she harm Krista? Interviews with some of Krista's other friends fleshed out the night further. Her married friends Kathy and Dale had gone to Bosom Buddy's bar on Saturday night around midnight looking for Krista. They knew that she was depressed about losing her job and having no money, and also the fight with her dad. They hoped to cheer her up, but she wasn't there. The bouncer said she'd left. So they drove their friend Jeff home and went and rented a movie and went home. Dale was awakened at 1:30 a.m. by a phone call from Krista, asking him to pick her and Sasha up at Toto's and drive them home. Already in bed, Dale declined. Krista ended up getting a ride for both of them from Jan. Detective Lee interviewed Krista's ex-girlfriend and continuing love interest Sasha on October 2nd. Sasha said she met Krista at the library club 2 to 3 years ago, and they had lived together on and off. They finally broke up a year earlier, but Krista actively wanted to get back together. The two generally talked daily. Sasha said she last saw Krista on Saturday night at Toto's bar. Krista was with several friends Sasha didn't know and seemed tipsy. Sasha said she got drunk that night too on 6 Long Island iced teas, which gives me a headache even to contemplate. Sasha didn't really remember how the evening ended, but she'd been told Jan and Krista carried her to Paul's house and Paul was pissed. She slept until 1 the next day and sat around with Paul watching TV all day and didn't leave. Police interviewed Paul and had confirmed that he and Sasha were together all day, minus 45 minutes in which he left to pay the rent. Sasha didn't have a car, and it was doubtful that she would have been able to get to Krista's, kill her, and get back within that time frame. Additional interviews laid out for detectives exactly how drama-filled Krista's life was and how many people might have wanted her dead. About a week before she was killed, a fight broke out at her apartment. She had a bunch of people over and everyone was drunk. Dale got jealous because he perceived that Krista was hitting on his wife, Kathy. He actually struck Kathy. At this same gathering, Sasha and her ex, Annie, were fighting, and somehow Sasha got hit on the head. Now, you'll recall the neighbors' reports about Krista yelling, "Call the police," and 2 men talking about why one of them had hit a woman. My personal theory is that those reports pertained to this event. The man saying he hit a woman because she deserved it wasn't talking about Krista, but Kathy, whom Dale had whacked in a jealous rage. It all makes sense when you look at it this way, especially because no men ever materialized who had it out for Krista and were involved in a melee in her apartment shortly before she was killed. Another incident had happened the previous week. Krista and Annie had gotten into a literal brawl in the yard in front of Paul Kay's house where Sasha was living. Annie tried to stop Krista from going inside to see Sasha, and they got into a physical fight. Krista gave Annie a black eye. Annie and Krista had fought over Sasha before. Annie was one of the people who was said to have a problem with Krista. Police had to sort through all this drama, totally in the dark as to whether they were looking for a male or female killer, until the lab results on the rape kit came back. And when it did, they learned that semen had been found on the vaginal swabs taken from Krista at autopsy. Now, since she was technically bisexual, it wasn't out of the question that she'd had consensual sex with a man. But it was deemed out of the question that she had held a knife to her own throat, hit herself on the head with an object that disappeared, and voluntarily died on the couch with her pants and underwear dangling off one foot. The totality of the circumstances pointed to a sexual assault and murder by a male perpetrator, and from then on, that was the direction the investigation went. Police started sitting down with the males in Krista's life for interviews and to try to obtain blood and saliva samples for blood typing comparison to the semen in her body. Krista's friend Alvin R. came to the police station for an interview with Detective Nelson. He said he'd been friends with Krista for about 18 months. He'd hung out with her at the library lounge on Friday night, the 29th, and he'd loaned her $20 because she had no money. She was supposed to pay him back on Monday. He drove her home around 3:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. When he dropped her off, he told her he would wait outside until she got into the house safely, and she should turn on a light to let him know that she was inside. The light came on, and although the shades were down, he could see around their edges that the light was on inside the apartment. He never heard from her again. He learned that she'd been killed possibly as little as 36 hours later. So Alvin knew where Krista lived, and she would have readily let him into her apartment. They were good friends. On the list he went, and blood and saliva samples were collected from him. Jeff S., the one who had introduced Alvin to Krista, came in for an interview with Detective Nelson on October 10th. It seems he may have dated Krista casually, but they never had a sexual relationship, he claimed. Jeff said he used to help Krista out by driving her to her required meetings, but that was about it. The last time he saw her was about a month before the murder. Jeff wasn't all that interesting, but as a male associate of Krista's, his name was written down in pen. Police interviewed Toby, her newish friend who had spent much of Saturday night in Krista's company. He said they'd only known each other for about 2 weeks. Toby had a girlfriend and said he saw Krista just as a friend, but he admitted that he knew where she lived and he'd been to her apartment. He was another person police had to keep on the list for the time being, and samples were collected from him as well.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
Okay, let's talk about the first real suspect in this case, someone police side-eyed very quickly and who stayed in their sights for years. I'm talking about Mike T., the guy who found Krista. As I said, the cops held him outside her apartment while they looked over the suspicious death scene that appeared immediately to be a sexual assault. A male suspect was totally on the table. Lieutenant Meyer had looked inside Mike's parked pickup truck and saw camouflage clothing that looked just like the pants found draped on the wooden chair in Krista's apartment. Maybe they were his. Mike said they weren't and claimed he'd only met Krista a month earlier and didn't even know her last name. He did admit, though, that he was hoping to date her. And Mike told the officers at the scene that he hadn't been to Krista's apartment in over a week. But a female neighbor who had emerged in her robe to see what was going on told the officers that was a lie. She had seen Mike T. at the apartment just the day before. And Mike was barraging the cops with detailed questions about how Krista had died, saying he hoped she hadn't taken her own life, was force involved, and so on. Yet, despite his overt interest in the details, Mike exhibited an oddly flat affect that was noted as atypical. Officer Davenport took Mike down to the station with him for an interview. Davenport put Mike in an interview room to wait for detectives, and they left him there for a couple of hours. Mike became more and more agitated, repeatedly demanded to go home. He kept saying all he had done was find Krista and call it in. He thought he was doing the right thing, and they were treating him like a criminal. While he was waiting, the police ran his record and learned that he'd been arrested for a DUI literally 2 days earlier, at 11:22 p.m. on September 29th. He was held in jail overnight and released at 4 a.m. on Saturday the 30th. Krista had died sometime on Sunday. Finally, at 4:15 a.m., Detectives Hennessy and Millam sat down with Mike. Mike told them he had met Krista about a month earlier at a local bar called The Library. He said Krista was depressed because she'd been fired from her job a couple weeks earlier. She was out of money, and she wanted to move in with him. But Mike didn't live in Wichita. He lived in Viola. The last time he heard from her, he said, was on September 25th. She'd called him on the phone. He hadn't talked to or seen her since. Mike rambled on that he didn't think she was suicidal, but he saw the marks on her throat and blood on her shirt when he found her, so he was worried she'd harmed herself. He got upset because the investigators would not answer any of his questions about what had happened. Of course, they couldn't in case he was the suspect. He mumbled that he was just trying to do the right thing, and she must have killed herself because she was depressed. Mike told the investigators that it was true that he'd been at Krista's apartment sometime over the weekend before she was found. He'd loaned Krista a TV, and he wanted it back. He and his buddy Dave stopped by her place on Friday the 29th, sometime between 7 and 9 p.m. He knocked on her door, but no one was home, and her bike, typically padlocked to the side of the garage, was gone. He got the DUI that night in his El Camino with his buddy Dave. On Saturday the 30th in the afternoon, or maybe Sunday, he couldn't be sure, they stopped by Krista's again, but again her bike was gone and she wasn't home. Mike returned to Krista's on the evening of October 1st, around 1 a.m. He admitted to the investigators that he was hoping Krista would let him crash at her place. He had overstayed his welcome at Dave's, where he had crashed for the weekend, and it was late and he had to work the next morning in Wichita, so he didn't want to drive all the way home to Viola. He opened the screen door to Krista's apartment and was surprised to see the inside door standing partially open. It was dark in the apartment, so he called Krista's name. Nothing. He pushed open the door and could make out a form on the couch. He fumbled for a light switch but couldn't find it, so he used his Bic lighter to find the on switch on his little TV. When it came on, the light was just sufficient for him to see Krista on the couch, still, her eyes wide open. He pushed her arm, and then he saw the marks on her throat and some blood on her shirt, which was later found out to be barbecue sauce. He knew she was dead, and his mind went right to an OD, although the marks on her throat looked like someone had maybe choked her. He left, called the officers from the convenience store, and led them back to the apartment. He said that based on Krista's disarrayed clothing, it looked like she'd been raped. Mike admitted that he'd stayed at Krista's place a few times in the past, but he said they'd never had sex. He knew Krista was bisexual, and he hoped to date her. He also said that she often wore fatigues, and the fatigue pants in her apartment were probably hers. Meanwhile, back on South Osage, CSIs processed the pickup truck owned by Mike T., which was parked outside with his permission. They collected the camo shirt, which he said belonged to his brother, and a pack of Marlboros, the same brand found in the ashtray and under the couch. Detectives felt that the camo shirt matched the pants found on the chair. But I might point out that doesn't a lot of camo match? Anyway, they finally let Mike leave the station at 6:45 a.m. A little digging told the investigators that Mike was on parole. He told them he'd been in and out of the state prison over the past 7 years. I don't know what he was in for, but police did interview his parole officer. And Officer Alexander also recognized Mike, and looking back at his logbook saw that he'd written him a ticket for erratic driving and no driver's license about a month earlier, at 2 a.m. on the very same block where the murder had taken place. At the time, Mike told the officer he was looking for the address of the home of a female friend he'd just met, Krista. All of this was making Mike look increasingly guilty. The problem was, the investigators couldn't place Mike with Krista when she was killed. When Mike had summoned the police, Krista was already in full rigor, and the ME thought she'd been dead for up to 12 hours. This was at 3 a.m. Well, 12 hours before 3 a.m. is 3 p.m., and Mike had an alibi for that afternoon. This was his buddy David W., the guy whose couch Mike was crashing on that weekend. They were together all weekend long. On Sunday, the day Krista was killed, sometime in the early afternoon, Dave and Mike had been miles away, fixing some woman named Mary's broken water line in her trailer. They then went to the home of another guy named Mike from 8 to 10 Sunday night, which was verified, and then back to Dave's. Mike left there around 11:30 Sunday night and went to the Johnson General Store to visit a clerk he knew named Becky and get a due, as he said. Even if the medical examiner was wrong and Krista had been dead for much fewer than 12 hours, Mike's activities for nearly all of Sunday put him elsewhere and with others. Mike remained the number one suspect on the investigators' list, but unless a new set of facts emerged, Krista's murder could not be pinned on him. Then another guy, Detective Nelson, interviewed Dale H., who was the 25-year-old man married to Kathy S. The couple was very good friends with Krista. Dale had raised the hackles of the investigators because when Detectives Nelson and Landwehr went back to Krista's apartment to get the steak knife to compare to her neck wounds, they found Dale loitering outside. He told them that he knew Krista and had heard a rumor that she was killed, and he just came over to see if it was true because he couldn't believe it. Dale said he and Krista were really tight. He'd been to her place scores of times. He said he and his wife Kathy were considering having Krista stay with them for a bit because she was being evicted. After being asked whether he'd ever gotten together with Krista, Dale said no. He said Krista was depressed, but he denied killing her or having any idea who had. Then there was Paul K., the guy whom Krista's love interest Sasha was living with. Detectives learned from various witnesses such as Robin and Annie that Paul K. did not like Krista. He was obsessed with and possessive of Sasha and was threatened by all the women she dated, it was felt. Not only that, he viewed them as a bad influence on Sasha's sobriety. Police learned that Krista and Paul had had it out a few months earlier, and Krista had socked Paul in the mouth and knocked out one of his teeth. Sasha's friend Annie also related that she found Paul masturbating into her underwear. There were stories also about him using homophobic slurs, and of course, Sasha said he beat her up. Police were very interested in talking to Paul K. Unfortunately, the notes, if any, of his 1989 interview are gone. All I know is that Paul K. was not ruled out as a suspect, and along with Mike T., was considered the most likely candidate to be Krista's killer.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats Knix leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose Knix. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. Knix undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, Knix makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks, and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at Knix.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. Knix, for your leaks, for your life.
Then there was another guy who knew Krista named Wayne. Police learned his name because when Krista's blue bike was noticed to be missing, Wayne was named as someone who occasionally borrowed it. Wayne was a 35-year-old postal worker who had rented an apartment to Sasha, Darlene, and Krista in the past. After Krista and Sasha split up, Krista had stayed with Wayne for a couple of months, from May to August 1989. Wayne said that Krista was a regular pot smoker who bought her stuff from some guy named Steve, who lived on the corner of Water and Gilbert. She was a night owl who liked to go out to bars and clubs and stay out very late. Wayne admitted that he'd been to Krista's place at least 7 times since she moved in, and that they'd had sex a couple of times. Note that Wayne was 35 and Krista was just 20. According to Wayne, he and Krista remained in regular contact, and he had spoken with her on the Friday night before she was killed. She had called him to ask him to loan her some money, but he said he didn't have any. All of these people were interviewed in the first 48 hours after Krista was found. Detective Hennessy's notes say, quote, "At the conclusion of this date, October 2nd, 1989, no witnesses were found who could shed any light as to what may have happened that weekend at 506 South Osage." Well, that about sums it up. Despite being at a dead end in terms of solid leads, police continued following up with interviews and tracking people down again and asking for saliva and blood samples. The best they could hope for was that one of these guys would match the blood type of the semen samples, and if he did, he would get an even closer look. They also asked for fingerprints to see if they could place any of these guys in Krista's apartment around the time of the murder. Detective Nelson collected prints and blood and saliva samples from Toby, who had hung out with Krista on the last night of her life. Alvin R., who'd been with Krista on Friday night, also gave samples. So did Wayne, the postal worker friend of Krista's. Dale also agreed to provide Detective Nelson with saliva and blood samples. His fingerprints were already on file, but, of course, he had already admitted to being in the apartment numerous times. Michael T. gave Detective Nelson finger and palm prints and blood and saliva samples. So did Dave W., Mike T.'s buddy, and alibi. Paul K. gave samples as well, although I imagine he wasn't happy about it. Prints and samples were collected from pretty much every man who had known contact with Krista. Some examples are Eric S., a bartender at one of Krista's favorite bars who knew her well, Dennis H., a guy Krista had had over to her place a couple of weeks before the murder, Vernon T., a local restaurant worker whose name the crime scene investigators found on an undated note in Krista's apartment saying, "I'll be right back," Michael H., a friend of Krista's who had been to her apartment in the past, Steve G., whose name several people relayed as a longtime friend of Krista's with whom she had stayed in the past. Jasper L., a friend of Krista's who admitted seeing her within a week of the murder. Dennis M., who lived in the neighborhood and somehow got on police radar. Jeff S., who had introduced Krista to her good friend Alvin. And Brad B., a good friend of Krista's whose house she had left her bike at the week before. For someone so young, Krista sure knew a lot of people. The point of reeling off all these names is to illustrate exactly how diligent Wichita investigators were at establishing a dragnet for samples. They pretty much pulled in everyone whose name was ever mentioned as someone Krista knew. If his name was in the case file, he was requested to give a sample. The reports I received from the Wichita police are spotty and don't indicate whether the blood type of any of these guys matched the suspects. But even if it did, as we know, blood type isn't all that helpful. Millions and millions of people share the same blood type. It was the best they had at the time, but it wasn't exclusionary. In an effort to take things a step further, some materials from the case were also sent to the fledgling FBI DNA unit in November 1989, including vaginal swabs taken from Krista and the tampon. The FBI lab was not able to obtain any usable results, and I'm 99% sure that they lost the tampon. The fact is that Krista's case went cold very quickly because there was just nothing. She'd been killed by a blow to the head by an object they couldn't identify. There were no witnesses. There was no forced entry, and nothing much of value was stolen. She wasn't killed for her battered blue bike or gold necklace. This seemed more like a personal crime than a robbery. In a prescient statement to the Wichita Eagle, a couple of days after the murder, Lieutenant Mike McKenna of the Wichita Police said, quote, "We have no leads at this point to work. Based on the information we have now, this will be a difficult case to solve," end quote. A few days later, he said, "It's just a very slow process. We have very few leads and very little, if any, idea of the motive." Speaking of prescient statements, Krista's family ran a blurb in the Wichita Eagle on October 15th. It wasn't long, but it was eye-catching in big, bold font. It read, quote, "To the murderer of Krista Martin, do you think God has eyes that cannot see, ears that cannot hear, and a mouth that cannot speak? I have seen you do the work of the devil. God has placed upon my heart a burden to deliver this message to you. You will seek joy, peace, and happiness from this moment forth. They shall flee from you. You shall lose all your worldly possessions. You must confess your sin before God and man, or thou shalt surely die. May all praise and glory be given to Jesus Christ our Lord and Savior." Please read Ezekiel 3:18-19, end quote. Years passed. On the 4th anniversary of the murder on October 2nd, 1993, the Wichita Crime Stoppers featured Crime of the Week was Krista's. The blurb in the local paper said on the 4th anniversary of the murder of Krista Martin, police were still seeking information. That would remain true for decades to come. And then there was BTK. I'm going to assume that my listeners have a basic familiarity with the banal Cub Scout troop leader, census worker, and church council president who moonlighted as the sadistic bind, torture, kill slayer who killed at least 10 people in Wichita and Park City. Dennis Rader was arrested in 2005 after he could not resist tooting his own horn in letters to the police. After his arrest, there was speculation that he could be responsible for more crimes, and family members of unsolved murder victims and the media began to consider other murders BTK could have carried out. The Wichita Eagle compiled a list of 15 unsolved cases that had taken place since 1974 in this area of Kansas. That was the year of BTK's first known murder of the Otero family. Krista's case was one of those listed, for lack of a single other viable suspect. Dennis Rader was the Kansas resident boogeyman, for good reason. But the fact was, Krista's case didn't really fit his M.O. She wasn't bound and she wasn't strangled or suffocated. Her murder came across as being unplanned, perhaps a blitz attack by someone angry with her, rather than one of BTK's meticulous and prolonged binding and torture sessions. Spoiler, it wasn't him. Krista's case was reopened in January 2009. This was after Detective Dan Hardy was reviewing old cases and noted an untested sexual assault kit in evidence in her case. When I say untested, I mean untested with modern technology. As we heard, they had done what they could do in 1989, but the state of DNA analysis in 2009 was vastly improved. Detective Hardy noted there was still plenty of physical evidence to work with. Despite the tampon being lost, they still had several items from the rape kit, including fingernail scrapings and vaginal swabs. The list of items sitting in the evidence locker was really astounding. They still had the steak and the corn cob, the silverware, the toilet water, a piece of flesh containing the bite mark removed from Krista's leg, a bunch of stuff from atop the coffee table, mounted hair slides collected from the sofa cushion, pillowcase, sleeping bag, and clothing, and the pieces of the broken ceramic bowl found outside. Detective Hardy submitted biological samples from the autopsy and rape kit to the Regional Forensic Science Center in Sedgwick County, Kansas, for analysis. Specifically, he sent in several blood samples from Krista, a vaginal swab and slide with a vaginal smear, fingernail scrapings from Krista's right and left hand, anal and oral swabs from her autopsy, pubic hair and pubic hair combings, body swabs from her right leg, right side face, both wrists, left leg, upper body, and both hands, and various hair samples. The lab report dated January 27, 2010 reads, semen was detected on the glass slide with smear labeled vaginal smear 1. DNA analysis was performed on the glass slide smear. The lab report continues. The DNA profile obtained from the non-sperm fraction of the swabbing of glass slide with smear, vaginal swab 1, is consistent with the profile of a female individual. The DNA profile obtained from the sperm cell fraction of the swabbing of glass slide with smear, vaginal swab 1, is a mixture of at least 2 individuals. The major contributor to this profile is consistent with the profile of an unknown male individual." End quote. They did not obtain usable DNA from the other samples, but this was all they needed. The lab report concluded, quote, "Data obtained from the sperm cell fraction will be entered into the CODIS system and searched against local, state, and national databases." End quote. Krista's case was not entered into CODIS until 2009, 11 years after the NDIS was fully activated. Yet, there were no matches. So Detective Hardy had to bite the bullet and start contacting people in the 20-year-old case file and request DNA samples for direct comparison to the sample in evidence. He painstakingly tracked down and collected voluntary samples from pretty much everyone whose name I mentioned in connection with the 1989 investigation. He also collected samples from Tony K., an acquaintance of Krista's, Bobby Ellis, a bad dude who told people he was Krista's fiancé and who was in prison for life, and Anthony H., a former roommate of Krista's. He also got samples from Krista's stepbrothers, Angel and Timothy, and the guy Donald T., whose necklace she had in her apartment and who reportedly had a crush on her. And he obtained samples from men who had always remained sort of on the suspect list for lack of definitive exclusion, men like Mike T., Dale H., and Paul K., all of whom had raised the OG investigator's eyebrows. None of them matched.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats Knix leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose Knix. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. Knix undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, Knix makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at Knix.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. Knix, for your leaks, for your life.
In the late summer of 2020, Wichita Police Detective Adam Vandermolen was asked to re-examine the Krista Martin case with an eye toward conducting a forensic genealogy investigation. The Wichita Police was aware that they had plenty of DNA and evidence in Krista's case, and the decision was made to proceed full steam ahead. Detective Vandermolen obtained a vaginal swab and evidence from the Regional Forensic Science Center, and then, per the recommendation of the FBI in Wichita, he sent the sample to Othram Labs in the Woodlands, Texas. Othram was able to obtain a SNP profile of the suspected killer from the vaginal swab. They then took the initial step of uploading the profile to the open-source databases and provided a report regarding the DNA relatives to Special Agent Scott Mackey of the Wichita FBI. A breakdown of the suspect's DNA ancestry indicated that he had partial Hispanic heritage, as much as 30%. The FBI analysts started building a family tree based on the DNA relatives found in the databases. This all took several weeks. Then, the FBI recommended obtaining a reference sample to see if they were on the right track. The very first reference sample they recommended obtaining was from a man named R. Clayton. On March 16, 2021, Detective Vandermolen and FBI Special Agent John Davis went to Haleyville, Alabama, to contact R. Clayton and see if he would provide a reference sample. R. Clayton agreed to meet with the investigators and readily provided information on his family history and his whereabouts in 1989. His whereabouts were not in Kansas. His family was rooted in Arkansas and had no known contacts with Kansas whatsoever. R. Clayton and his ex-wife Jana, shout out to Jana, whose interest in genealogy and true crime were instrumental in solving this case, provided the following important information to the investigators trying to find out who had killed Krista. R. Clayton's father was James Clifford Clayton of Paragould, Arkansas. James Clayton and his wife Bertie had borne R. Clayton and his brother James Edward Clayton. James Clayton had been in the military in Alaska and went back and forth between Alaska and Alabama with no known connection to Kansas. R. Clayton and Jana reported that R's father, James Clifford Clayton, had a brother named Troy Clayton, R's uncle, who had 9 children rooted in Arkansas. These were all of R. Clayton's first cousins, 8 girls and a boy, all of whom had to be included in this ever-expanding family tree. R. Clayton agreed to give a reference sample of his DNA, and when the Wichita investigators got the results back, they were elated. This was going to be easy. R. Clayton shared 1,200 centimorgans with the suspect, typically signifying a fairly close relationship such as great-grandparent, great-aunt or uncle, half-aunt or uncle, first cousin, half-niece or nephew, or half-sibling. But despite this initially promising result, it was much, much harder than they anticipated. So hard that Detective Vandermolen told me that this was one of the most difficult genealogy cases the FBI has undertaken. Basically, they could not find the relative they were seeking. No one in the family had significant Hispanic heritage. No one had any connection to Kansas. And no one they tested shared more DNA with the suspect than R. Clayton did with his 1,200 centimorgans in common. But believe me, they tried. The investigators traveled to Arkansas on May 24, 2021 to research one of the cousins of R. Clayton. R. Clayton's cousin Troy had been killed in an accident, but his wife and son spoke to the investigators, and the son agreed to provide a reference sample when they told him they believed a relative of his was possibly involved in a crime. But Troy's wife said that her deceased husband had never gone to Kansas that she knew of. In June 2021, they explored R. Clayton's immediate family more closely. His brother, James Edward Clayton, had 2 children who had different mothers. FBI agents in Annapolis, Maryland, reached out to one daughter, but her reference sample showed she was less related to the suspect than was her uncle, the OG reference tester, R. Clayton. They returned to the cousins of R. Clayton, the 9 children born to his uncle Troy, and all of their children. Building out this part of the family tree was crucial, given what they knew about the relationship R. Clayton shared with the suspect. The level of shared DNA pointed to someone pretty closely related to him. But it was a complicated and time-consuming task, involving reviewing old funeral home records, obituaries and other newspaper articles, public documents, and traveling extensively to Alabama and Arkansas. The Troy Clayton branch of the family tree was deeply rooted in Arkansas, with relative after relative cropping up there. Almost everyone in this branch of the suspect's tree was very cooperative, but many of them were deceased. They were all Arkansas, no Kansas, and none of the additional testing pointed to the suspect. The FBI reached sort of an impasse on the genealogy analysis as they continued to reference test people who were less related to the suspect than was R. Clayton. The FBI agent the WPD was working with, Scott Mackey, even ran their findings by Steve Kramer and Steve Bush of the FBI in California, the famed duo who spearheaded the FBI's forensic genealogy program. The Steves confirmed that they were doing everything right, but no one could figure out why it was leading them in circles. Frustrated, Detective Vandermolen reached out in February 2022 to a local Wichita area genealogical group, which does not want to be named. He provided the group with the information that he and the FBI had gathered so far. Here's a quote from one of his reports. On February 15th, I attended a meeting with this group. They developed new information about our suspect based on what they had gleaned about the suspect's family tree, his close relation to R. Clayton, and the fact that he had some Hispanic ancestry. The team informed us that they were very confident that our suspect was a half-brother of R. Clayton and James Edward Clayton. They said they were positive, based on DNA analysis, that the mother of the suspect was of Hispanic descent, and the suspect did not share X DNA with James and R. Clayton. It was time to go back and visit R. Clayton and his ex, Jana. Jana had some important information up her sleeve. She told them that her ex-husband, R. Clayton, for whom she had done a family tree, had been born in Michigan, so she knew he had lived there with his father, James Clifford Clayton, and mother, Bertie. James Clifford Clayton worked at an orchard there in the 1950s. After the orchard closed down, James Clifford moved his family to Indiana, where he worked as a manual laborer and factory worker. Then the family relocated to Arkansas, and there the trail went cold. They still could not connect the Claytons to the unnamed suspect, sharing 1,200 centimorgans of DNA with R. Clayton. The investigators knew that their suspect had about 30% Hispanic heritage. They decided to pursue some of the lower-level DNA relatives who had matched with the suspect's sample. They were members of the Manuel and Rosaura Perez family. It was time to go to South Texas. On August 11, 2022, Detective Vandermolen and John Davis traveled to Texas and connected with Art Salazar of the Harlingen PD, an FBI task force officer. They wanted help making contact with family members of the Perez family. It just so happened that TFO Salazar recognized the name and address of one of their possible relatives on the investigators' list as someone he worked with, Daniel R. He was an analyst in the FBI's Brownsville office. Daniel R. told Detective Vandermolen and Special Agent Davis that he was the great-grandson of Rosaura and Manuel Perez. He told them the names of his grandmother, Rosaura and Manuel's daughter, and his mother, their granddaughter. So they went to speak with Daniel's mother, Thelma. She told them that Manuel and Rosaura had 13 children, and Rosaura also had a daughter from a previous marriage. The investigators took notes on all these children, their marriages, and progeny. Then they started contacting them and requesting reference samples to see if they could find someone with a closer kinship relationship to the suspect, or someone who remembered the Claytons or who lived in Kansas in 1989. They visited the home of a Fabian S. and his mother Dora. Both agreed to give DNA samples. They also collected a sample from a woman named Marlissa. Her mother was Amalia Vela, one of Rosaura and Manuel's children. Finally, they collected a sample from the FBI guy, Daniel R., the great-grandson of Rosaura and Manuel. They submitted all these reference samples and waited. When the results came in, they provided all the information to the Wichita Genealogy Society, who had taken on the case. And this group came up with the names of two potential suspects, brothers with the last name Hart, who hailed from Arkansas. The Hart brothers' mother was a daughter of Manuel and Rosaura Perez, so they knew they were on the right track. They couldn't connect either Hart brother to R. Clayton, the original 1200 Centimorgans match, though. There was no known nexus between the Perez descendants and the Claytons. A misattributed parentage event was very, very likely.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats Knix leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose Knix. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. Knix undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, Knix makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks, and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at Knix.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. Knix, for your leaks, for your life.
Detective Vandermolen set to work trying to see if either Hart brother had any connection whatsoever to Wichita. No one in the Martin family had heard the name Hart from Krista or remembered anyone of that name in her social circles. But old Wichita public directories relating to rental properties in Krista's neighborhood provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Paul Hart, one of the two brothers identified as the likely candidate to be the suspect, had lived 6 houses away from Krista in October 1989. And in January 1990, 2 months after her murder, Paul Hart abruptly left Wichita and returned to Arkansas. Paul Hart became the #1 suspect. Unfortunately, he had been killed in a traffic accident in 1999. But Detective Vandermolen started digging into Paul Hart. On June 13, 2023, the detective and FBI Special Agent Scott Mackey went to Monette, Arkansas, to talk to Paul Hart's daughter from his marriage to his wife, Kay. The daughter, whom I'm calling Desiree, agreed to give a DNA sample to see if she was closely related to the suspect sample. She also recommended that the investigators contact her first cousins, Maria and Molly. Their father was her father Paul Hart's brother, whom I'm just calling M. Hart. Maria and Molly did not seem surprised to see the investigators show up at their workplace and tell them they were investigating a family member for murder. Maria asked if they suspected their father, M. Hart, of being the killer. The detectives said it was possible, but the murderer could be either Paul Hart or his brother, M. Hart. Maria offered up that her father, M. Hart, was mean and called him a psycho. He used to say things to their mom like, "I could kill you and dispose of your body and no one would know." He made reference to having gotten away with something like that before. As for whether Paul Hart could be the killer they were seeking, no way. Maria and Molly were adamant that their Uncle Paul was a great guy. Everyone loved him. There was 0 chance he had killed someone. Maria was more than willing to give a DNA sample to check how closely she was related to the still unnamed suspect. When the Wichita police received the results, they showed that Desiree was likely the biological child of the person who left his DNA on Krista. And according to Desiree and her mother, Kay, her father was Kay's deceased spouse, Paul Hart. After receiving these results, Detective Vandermolen returned to Monette, Arkansas to meet with Desiree and her mother, Kay, on August 17, 2023. Kay was able to provide some pretty helpful information about her husband, Paul. Before they had married, Paul had run away from Arkansas with a married woman named Kim H. The two had left town together and settled in, drumroll, Wichita, Kansas. Paul and Kim had sent a postcard to Paul's daughter Desiree that was mailed May 23, 1988 from Plains, Kansas, which Desiree still had and was able to show the detective. Kay and Desiree both agreed to give additional DNA samples to be compared in a paternity-type test. This is a quote from Detective Vandermolen's report. On August 24, 2023, the paternity testing was completed at RFSC by Dr. Shelley Stedman, who conducted the original DNA testing on this case. Dr. Stedman produced a report for me that stated, quote, "The probability of paternity is approximately 99.95%. The DNA results obtained are approximately 231 times more likely if the unknown male contributor to the sample is the biological father of Desiree Hart than would be the case of an unrelated random individual was the father." The number wasn't astronomical because of the poor state of the DNA on the decades-old vaginal swab, but it still left no doubt given the totality of the circumstances. Paul Hart was the man who left his semen inside Krista and left her dead on her couch in October 1999. Okay, so who was this guy and why was he so hard to identify through forensic genealogy? Paul Matthew Hart was born on December 19, 1966 in Missouri. His parents of record are Maria Ybarra Hart, whose parents were Manuel and Rosaura Perez. According to the birth records, Paul Hart's father was a man named William Lee Hart. But the DNA testing indicated that William was not Paul's father. James Clifford Clayton was. Remember that the initial reference tester, R. Clayton's numbers were consistent with him being a half-sibling to the suspect. R. Clayton's father was James Clifford Clayton. James Clifford had worked as a factory worker at times in his life, and the family believed he may have done so while living in Arkansas in the 1960s when Paul Hart was born. Maria Ybarra Hart also worked a factory job in Arkansas for decades. Detective Vandermolen told me he was able to show that the area in which the James Clifford Clayton family lived is relatively close to the area where the Hart family lived. Is this the connection? We can only presume at this point because the members of Paul Hart's family, his remaining siblings, absolutely refused to believe that Paul Hart had a different father and was a murderer. Detective Vandermolen told me he's a hated man in that part of Arkansas, and the Hart family members have made it clear that they will not talk to him and they believe he is lying about Paul's parentage. As far as they're concerned, Paul is a full sibling to sisters Virginia, Billy, and Laura, and to his brother M. Hart, the one whose daughters, Molly and Maria, said he could have been the killer. And the detective has reason to believe that William Hart was unaware that his son, in air quotes Paul, was not his son at all. Detective Vandermolen has received numerous nasty text messages from members of the Hart family who are incensed at the suggestion that science does not lie. Luckily, Paul's daughter Desiree and his wife Kay were willing to share some information about Paul. Desiree said her father was a semi-truck driver for J.B. Hunt Trucking Company and also worked for Wallace Farms. And of course, his wife Kay relayed the story about Paul running off to Wichita before they had met, and then he moved back to Arkansas in January 1990. Paul Hart had died in a car crash in Memphis, Tennessee. Kay was able to detail this event because she was actually in the car with her husband when he was killed. The story she told Detective Vandermolen was that Paul was driving and she was in the passenger seat. He was intoxicated and they were arguing. He missed an exit and swerved and cut across traffic to try to get to the exit ramp, but was T-boned by an oncoming tractor trailer. The car was dragged for hundreds of feet and 32-year-old Paul was killed. Kay was lucky to survive. Paul's brother M. Hart was in the car behind Kay and Paul and saw the whole thing. The Memphis PD still had the accident report, so Detective Vandermolen was able to confirm the accident at 4:09 a.m. on Interstate 55. It included 2 vehicles, 3 people, and 1 fatality. Paul was pronounced dead at the scene. This part gives me the chills. Paul's sister posted on her Facebook page on the 23rd anniversary of her brother's death a memory of him and how devastated the family was when they got the call from her brother M saying that Paul had been killed in Memphis. She said that when the first day of spring comes around, quote, "we think of the loss of the brother, son, father, and husband. He was a very good man whose life was cut short. It was also my brother M's birthday," end quote. Paul was killed on his brother's birthday. But it's not M's birthday that I care about. The date of the fatal car crash was March 20th, 1999, what would have been Krista Martin's 30th birthday. Her killer, Paul Hart, was killed in an accident 10 years later, on the day his victim would have turned 30. How's that for karma? Detective Vandermolen inquired as to whether the Memphis coroner's office might still have a blood card for Paul on file. They didn't, but no one really needed it. The paternity test from Desiree was enough. After all of Detective Vandermolen's investigation into Paul Hart was wrapped up, Lieutenant R. Miller of the Wichita Police Department contacted District Attorney Mark Bennett and requested a meeting. They agreed that if Paul Hart were still living, D.A. Bennett would have sufficient probable cause to charge him with Krista's murder. He considered the case to be a complete and closed investigation.
From coast to coast, unlock adventure at Red Lion Hotels by Sonesta, where restful sleep, friendly service, and local knowledge await. Whether for business or pleasure, spend less and make more of every trip. When you sign up for the Sonesta Travel Pass, you'll get their best rates instantly. Go to Sonesta.com to book your stay and unlock their best rates with Sonesta Travel Pass. Here today, roam tomorrow. Join now at Sonesta.com. Terms and conditions apply.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats Knix leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose Knix. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. Knix undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, Knix makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at Knix.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. Knix, for your leaks, for your life.
At a press conference on October 2nd, 2023, the public was notified that Paul Hart was the suspect in the murder of Krista Martin. The DA addressed his review of the case and his conclusion that there was probable cause to charge Paul Hart were he alive. Supervisory Special Agent Ryan Williams of the FBI addressed generally how forensic genealogy was used to identify Paul Hart. And Krista Martin's niece, Ember Moore, her mom was Krista's sister, addressed the media. She said, quote, "On behalf of my family and myself, I would like to say thank you to the Wichita Cold Case Unit and Wichita Homicide Department for all their hard work and dedication to Krista's case. I'm glad we can finally move forward and have peace, knowing that Krista's murderer is not walking around free or among us. She deserved so much more out of this life than what she ended up with," end quote. Ember said that when she turned 21, the case was 20 years old and at a standstill. She told KAKE, quote, "I think my mom and grandma, I don't want to say moved on, but they hadn't made contact with anyone, the investigators, in several years. And when I turned 21, I had outlived my aunt, and that's when I contacted detectives," end quote. Amber reached out to Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, who had worked the original investigation. He referred her to Sergeant Dan Hardy, who was in charge of the case at the time, and this spurred the 2009 reinvestigation. Amber said that Detective Hardy took the case to heart and worked overtime to try to solve it, but he couldn't. Then in 2020, she heard about forensic genealogy from a crime show, and she called the department to see if they could use the technology on her aunt's case. Detective Vandermolen told her it was already underway. Amber told KAKE that even though she always felt the case would be solved, when Detective Vandermolen called her, she was in shock. She called her grandma, Krista's mom, and her own mother, Krista's sister, and relayed the news. She said it took days for the shock to wear off. She found herself both disappointed and relieved that Paul Hart was dead. He would avoid standing trial, but her elderly grandmother wouldn't have to sit through one either. But she said she would now never know the answer to her one remaining question: why? Okay, so how did Paul Hart end up in the apartment of Krista Martin on Sunday, October 1st, 1989? And what went down between them? Detective Vandermolen reviewed the entire case file and spoke with the OG investigators and Krista's friends and family. None had ever heard the name Paul Hart, and his name was never mentioned in all the thousands of pages of case file materials. Krista was someone who was friends with a lot of different people, but she didn't seem to keep secrets. It seems unlikely that she knew Paul very well, or her friends and family would have heard about him. Detective Vandermolen figured out from mapping it out that Paul Hart's rental apartment was just 6 houses from Krista's. They were essentially neighbors. Hart lived in apartment 9 at 818 West University Street, and Krista lived at 506 South Osage Street. From Krista's house, South Osage continues south for a very brief period before curving and turning into University. Paul Hart's place was just 0.1 mile away from hers. Given the proximity of the two young people, Paul Hart was 23 when he killed Krista. It's easy to imagine that he saw her out and about on her bike. Perhaps they even said hello or bummed a smoke or met at the corner store or whatever. Or perhaps Paul Hart was stalking and watching Krista and knew that she'd gotten home from the grocery store that day. He could have barged into her apartment and attacked her while she was eating. Or perhaps they were acquainted, he knocked, and she let him in. Detective Vandermolen points out that we just don't know, but he keeps coming back to the sleeping bag. Paul Hart took pains to cover Krista's nude lower half with the sleeping bag after he bludgeoned and raped her. That is either a sign of intense shame or some kind of effort to preserve Krista's dignity, which would indicate that he knew her. I think the steak knife is the key to understanding what happened here. All circumstances point to Krista eating a meal alone. Since no light were found on in the apartment, it was likely still daylight. She was sitting on the couch, enjoying her splurge steak by herself. Paul Hart knocked on the door. She got up and let him in. She knew him, but not well. There were 2 different soda cans sitting on the coffee table when Krista was found. Perhaps she offered him something to drink and he accepted. But then something happened. Something in which involved Krista's steak plate hitting the floor and the serrated knife being held firmly to her throat, causing those scratches. She was forced to strip down on her lower half, take out her tampon, and was raped on the couch. Remember that she had no defensive wounds. The knife at her throat would explain her compliance. At some point, Paul Hart bit her on the leg. And here's the greatest unknown of all. What did he use to finish Krista off? Police still don't know what hard object was used to hit her on the head. The wound to Krista's head bore no distinguishing marks that pointed to a specific implement of any sort. We can only speculate why Paul Hart didn't stab her or cut her throat with a knife instead. Perhaps he didn't mean to kill her, but just stun her. And we don't know whether Paul stole Krista's necklace and her bike as he left the apartment, leaving the door open behind him. Detective Vandermolen interviewed the woman named Kim who had run off to Wichita from Arkansas with Paul Hart. She had no idea he had killed someone mere feet away from the apartment they shared. Kim said she went to work every day, but Paul worked sporadically, mostly menial jobs. He tended to be a homebody and never exhibited any signs of being a killer. There was nothing remarkable about their time together in Wichita. Hart had virtually no criminal record, just some traffic infractions. And as we heard, Paul's family in Arkansas says it's impossible that he was a murderer. But the science says otherwise. And like so many of the killers we've seen in these heartbreaking stories, Paul Hart took the secret of what he did to Krista with him to the grave. Even though he was killed 25 years ago on Krista's birthday, forensic genealogy pulled those secrets out of his crypt and exposed him to all the world as the murderer he was. After 35 years, Krista Martin's case is closed thanks to forensic genealogy. And if you're one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Thank you so much to Wichita Detective Adam Vandermolen for answering my loads of questions about this case. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.